Wow. I mean, wow. We're talking episode 3 of HBO's The Third Day, titled Sunday the Ghost, where Sam learns about the truth of the island. We learn about Jess's upbringing, and we get some family reunions. We're talking about that and much more. Episode 3 of The Third Day was titled Sunday the Ghost. Sam is shocked to learn the truth about his connection to Osea and the islanders' intentions for his future. Later in a fight for his life, Sam tries desperately to escape their clutches and make it back to the mainland in one piece. Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Movie Files. Elliot back again with my weekly recap, breakdown, and review of HBO's The Third Day, episode 3, titled Sunday the Ghost. I am beyond excited to break down this episode with you all in this spoiler discussion. Before we dive into it, as you can see on the screen now, make sure you're following me on all my other social media accounts. That way you can stay up to date with what's going on over here at Movie Files, as well as get some of my insight on some of the latest movie and TV news out there. If you are new to this channel, welcome. Definitely subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of my other Third Day reviews, Lovecraft Country reviews, We Are Who We Are reviews, other TV shows, other movies, and all the live streams of fun things we do on this very channel. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Helps out the channel, but I also really appreciate it. And in the comments below, let's break this episode down from the beginning to the middle to the end. Let's talk about what's to come in this series. Is Naomie Harris's wife, and that's how she's going to come into the mix. Let's just break this all down in the comments below, because I am just floored by this episode. And I want to know what you all thought about this episode of The Third Day. So again, spoiler discussion. If you haven't seen the episode, check it out. Come back, join the conversation. But if you've seen this episode, let's jump into this breakdown recap. So first and foremost, first thoughts before I get into this recap here. I love this show, and I love this episode. I was floored. I watch a lot of TV. If you've been part of this community for the last 3 years, you know I watch Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, HBO, so on and so forth. And then I watch a lot of movies. So I watch a lot of content, and I was just so impressed by this episode. Number one, the first two episodes were great. The acting, the directing, the cinematography, the score has been fantastic. This creepy cult-like island going on. I'm beyond interested in the show. So intrigued about the story so far. But this episode, man, I don't know if you can top it. I mean, obviously they can. They have 3 other episodes ahead, but I was just so impressed by the story. We were able to get so much within this 1 hour, less than an hour to be technically speaking. It's like 58 minutes, less than an hour. We found out so much about the island, so much about Nathan, so much about Jess, and so many things to break down. So I love this episode, just saying that up top. So let's get into this recap. Opens up with Sam. I can't even really describe this scene, if I'm being honest. Obviously, I know kind of what it means now, that whole baptism that they were doing on Sam, but just initially watching that moment, it was confusing as hell, right? We see the bag being removed from his head. We see a crying baby in the background, which I think was some of his hallucinations from being on acid, but who the hell knows? There was, obviously we've seen a bunch of animals being sacrificed on the show. There's animals cut up on a table. We see 2 kids on a couch who we know who those kids are now, but obviously at that time we're like, who are these 2 girls? We see a preacher that we saw from last episode. We see a guy in a white suit who we didn't know who he was at that point. At least I don't remember them saying who he was, but we know that that is the father. That's currently the leader of the island right now. And I mean, there's bugs all over the place. They're making him drink this whatever liquid they give him. There's bugs all over the wall. Again, this is just weird. That opening scene, I'm just like, what's going on? Are we tripping? Are we on acid right now? Like, Sam, it is just a lot going on. But again, I'm loving just the weirdness of all this stuff that's going on in the show. But as we move forward, we see Larry takes Sam downstairs where he finds the architect, who's there as well. He tells him, that they're in the big house, and Sam was just baptized in the name of Isis. I think he said Isis. I thought he said Yeezus. I'm like, of course Kanye West would be involved with this cult-like following. Totally joking, but I think he says Isis at this point, and he kind of breaks down everything, right? He tells him what happened to Frederick, which we know from episode 1. Frederick was the founder of the island, and he was the first father, and his son was supposed to take on the mantle, take on the heir, but his son decided not to take on the heir and have his brother do it, which in doing so kind of caused some rift amongst the island. He wasn't really accepted by the island. So Frederick's son, who was initially supposed to take over, didn't want that life for himself, but more importantly for his family, his rest of his sons and potentially daughters or whatnot. So him doing that kind of disrupted the whole scenario with the Islanders, and we'll talk about the son that decided to not take on the heir. So this is one of like literally 10 big reveals that we get in this episode. So we see Sam, grandfather, who was stationed on this island, as we learned in episode 1. He was lying. His grandfather was not stationed there, but his grandfather was actually born there. And we find out in this moment that he was that son that left the island to protect his family and protect his son, obviously, who we all know to be later on Nathan, and that the island didn't want want this lifestyle for his son, and that Sam, when this is a big moment, Sam is the rightful heir of Osea, which is huge. I think we all kind of speculate, okay, why is Sam so important? Why is he connected to this island? What are these visions? Why are these people so infatuated by him? Well, because he is the next leader. He is the heir of Osea. So, we see him the architect asks Sam before Sam's taken away by Larry, do you feel the darkness inside you? He has this darkness because of this origins from his family, tree and his history of his family. So very interesting reveal. So let me know in the comments, guys, how did you guys take the news that Sam is the rightful heir of Osea, that Sam's grandfather was the son that fled the island? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. So we move forward. We see Sam is being taken to what look like the same area that he's been having these dreams about, him cutting himself open, which I think is another thing that we'll talk about, people cutting themselves open a little bit later. But it seems like that was the area that Larry took him to. Larry doesn't care who Sam's father is, and we know why Larry doesn't care a little bit later. Hence goes with Sam's son, we'll talk about here, but he doesn't care. He wants to just have someone else be the father moving forward. But we see him prepping. It looks like he was preparing to drown Sam, which is a very running theme throughout this show, but throughout this episode of Sam drowning. But in the midst of all this stuff, Larry's about to get Sam. He grabs Sam, but Sam's able to kick him in the face, knock him out. Thought that was kind of convenient. But either way, it served this purpose. I think it was all part of their tricking Sam, making Sam think that he's getting away, making Sam think he has the upper hand. This whole thing was all set up, right? But he runs to the, we see him escape. He runs to the path that leaves the island, but of course it's covered in water. Sam falls asleep overnight there. We see he wakes up to a bunch of crabs as we kind of move forward. He doesn't take his car, which I assume he didn't take his car because of it attracting too much attention and all that stuff. So he decides to walk across the water. He doesn't care. He doesn't care to just water up to his neck. He wants to get the hell off this island, and boy, can you blame him. We get, of course, the show is so beautifully shot. We see that overhead shot of the island and the path, and this show is just so beautifully put together. The cinematography is incredible, but we see him starting to drown. Again, we get this foreshadowing, him drowning. I don't know if that's a metaphor or allegory of him drowning in his own pain, his own sorrows, his own past sins, or what have you. So I don't know what that running theme of him drowning means. So let me know what that connection is, guys. I might be missing something there, but I just kind of took it as him like just drowning in his own pain and his own thoughts. But either way, we see Jess comes to save him, and we'll talk about Jess a little bit later and how she was so conveniently there to save Sam. But we move forward. We see Jess confronts him about the money that she found under the sink, and is he going through this episode? Is he making all this up, trying to make him seem crazy? And he's just like, no, Jess, I'm not making this up. Look, my hands are bound. We need to get the hell off this island. We need to get off of Osea. We see Sam and Jess go to the architect's home, and Jess tells him, or Jess asks Sam about her son, about his son, Nathan. And he tells him, a little bit about Nathan, guys, which he was a handful, as Sam puts it, that he had a problem distinguishing the difference between right and wrong, and that he was going through a cruel stage in torturing insects. So that darkness we were talking about kind of goes in the family line. I guess it's attached to the family tree. So we kind of understand Nathan's mindset a little bit. And we'll talk about Nathan a little bit later, but he was going through a cruel stage, which makes sense that he would go through this, knowing his family tree. So as we kind of move forward, Jess talks about her upbringing and her being raised in this kind of similar type of cult-like community, and the fact that these people that are believers of the cult and the believers of this religion, or whatever that religion may be, they don't take the words as like a grain of salt. They take it as factual. And she tells us a little bit of insight of the crickets and how they interpret the crickets, that it can be looked at as like flood and water, or can be looked at as death. And we'll talk about that last scene that we got here at the end of the show. We see the Martins show up, and they Jess tells them to come, and we get a little bit more of information. The Martins tell Sam everything, and I mean everything, to a certain extent. They tell him about the white man that is the father. He can't die because he has to pass on his kind of reins, his father leadership to someone else, and that someone is, of course, Sam. So this whole town was aware of Sam and the situation of his dad leaving the island and his grandfather leaving the island, I should say. And again, one of many big moments. So in this moment here, guys, Mr. Martin tells Sam the two ideas to be particular, to be exact. The one idea was to tell Sam, hey, you're the heir of this island. You need to come here, take up your duties, and fall in place. But Mr. Martin says, but you would never believe me if I told you that. So the second idea was a little bit more darker, a little bit more sinister, and that idea involved them kidnapping Sam's son, Nathan, and we know what happened with that. The guy from the asylum agreed to do so. He was an outsider, but they gave him this kind of, ultimatum. If you take this, Sam's son, we'll let you become an islander. We'll let you get on the island in exchange for you doing this. And Mr. Martin says, oh, it wasn't supposed to get violent, assuming that Nathan was killed as we thought, but boy, were we wrong. But it was Mr. Martin's idea, which makes sense that Mr. Martin, and we've been talking about it these last few weeks, the Martin seems so nice, at least Mr. Martin. Mrs. Martin seems to be a little on edge and seems to have these little moments with her husband, but Mr. Martin has been very nice to Sam, and it makes sense now, right? So we see that they knew the whole time and all that stuff. And at this point in time, Sam's just fed up, man. He tells the Martins that their beliefs are stupid, and that, their beliefs are the reason why his son's gone, why he's dead, and, he would rather slit his own throat than to stay another second on this island. And him saying those words were critical because Mrs. Martin took those words to heart. So as we move forward, the Martins agree to help him off the island. They tell him that Eppola is missing. Mrs. Martin yet again leaves Sam at the church as they're walking ahead. We see Sam sees a little boy yet again, and we have yet to see him say who he thinks that little boy looks like until this episode. He chases him in the church, and this is a big moment here. He comes across these different paintings of the different fathers, and showing their beliefs and showing their pain, how they relieve pain, how they sacrifice people for their religion, this, that, and the other. And he comes across another painting, which is a painting of himself as the father. Then he comes across this blood dripping off of this mantle. He removes the cloth or the sheet over this bloody area, and it's revealed that it's Eppola. She cut her stomach open, and it is just a gross scene. It's just oh, man, you feel so bad for Eppola, right? Because she's just a little girl. But we find out why Eppola is in the position she's in. So Mrs. Martin comes to Sam. She has a gun in her hand, and we find out even more information. Again, this is just reveals after reveals, and I loved it. Eppola did that to herself, guys. She thought it would be a sacrifice to help Osea, and ultimately she did it because Sam wouldn't stay, which makes that scene from last week when she's just don't go, please don't go. She didn't want to kill herself, but she had to, in her eyes, of course, because she's sacrificing her life for the greater good of the island and the greater good of the world, as they think. So leaves that moment and lets that scene have so much impact. So another incredibly huge moment now, guys. So we see, and I think this is the biggest moment of the show so far. Let me know if I'm wrong in saying so, but I think this moment was huge. Nathan's alive. And they use Jason's son, which explains Jason having some animosity towards, Sam, his presence on the island, but they use his son as bait. They use his son as a sacrifice. That wasn't Nathan. That was, the funeral and everything that was set up, the coroner and all that stuff. That was Jason's son. And Nathan's alive, guys. He's doing, as Mrs. Martin tells him, there's some holes to poke in that logic, but I'll in that logic of them switching the bodies and they weren't able to see that wasn't their son, I'll go with it, okay? I'll leave it there. But Mrs. Martin tells Sam that Nathan is doing fine and that Osea just bears so much pain, and the island isn't in good order. So in the island being in a bad spot, the world's in a bad spot, right? It just shows you the lengths of this religion that they believe that they have so much on their shoulders, that them not doing good, it causes the world to not do good. So again, it just shows you the lengths the people go to appease their religion, appease their beliefs, right? It's just insane. So we see, Sam and Mrs. Martin kind of get into a little fight. She shoots at him. They're both electrocuted. He loses his hearing. We kind of move past that scene. I don't think she's not dead because we see her later on, but we move past that. We see Sam, tries to make a phone call. We hear on the phone with his wife. He can't really hear because of course he's lost his hearing. He breaks his phone accidentally. We see the rain again, as Jess said, the crickets mean flood, means water, means rain potentially, or means death. So a little bit of both going on there. He goes back to get the knife. He runs into Jason. Jason tells him to get off the island, to go to the mainland, tell the police he'll look over his son. And I'm assuming at that point Jason is no longer a believer after losing his son, right? So that's why I kind of interpret that scene as being like Jason just wanted to do the right thing. So as we wrap up this episode, as we wrap up this recap here, Sam rubs into Jess. They go into a boat. They force off. I think his name was Thomas. They throw him off the boat because he's a part of the situation. Jess drives the boat, tells, Sam about what's going on, and she tells him about her upbringing and, about the family. And then as expected, everyone's turning on Sam. Jess is pointing a flare gun at him and tells him why she's doing what she's doing. She grew up in a similar situation, and that her cult following and her being married to her husband, he knows this particular cult, this island. So by her going along with this, she'll get to see her daughters. So it's kind of like Jess is not super bad, but she's willing to do anything to see her daughters again, to say the least. So we see that, after this point, they go on the island. The people are waiting for them. We see Jess's with those two girls at the beginning. Those were Jess's daughters. They run, have a family reunion of sorts. And we see the people Osea are waiting for him, and I assume the kids were held against their will. As far as Jess's kids, they might have willingly been there. Who knows? Again, this religious cult, they could maybe raise them that way. But we see the darkest here, as the father says, as he's approaching Sam. He has a gun in his hand, thinking that he might be shooting Sam. But no, the father shoots himself in the head. Thanks Sam. Before doing so, the crowd's applauding. Mr. Martin says, "Are you ready for what's next?" Sam starts crying, walks towards the house because he knows what's in that house, right? He walks towards the house, and Nathan's there. And instead of running away from his dad this whole time, he finally runs towards his dad. He's crying as we expected, because this whole time he's thought his son's been dead. It ends with a beautiful score. Again, the score, the cinematography is so beautiful, but it also ends with them walking to the house, and we get a bunch of crickets coming up on the screen, and it fades to black. What a hell of an episode. Sunday, The Ghost was incredible. Again, the acting, the storytelling, the cinematography, the score, the reveals that we got all within 1 hour was just so beautifully told. What does this mean for it, guys? I don't watch the previews. I haven't seen a trailer for the show. I just went to the show because I love HBO, so I really don't know what's ahead. I know who's all involved. I know that this next half of the season is going to focus on Naomie Harris's character, which is that Sam's wife? Is Naomie Harris going to be his wife, or is it going to be a whole new different scenario? I know episode 4 is going to be Autumn, which is a special episode as highlighted on HBO's website. So I don't know if this next episode will dive into what happened with Sam going into the house now, or is it going to be a flashback of Frederick's story of how they kidnapped, Nathan? I don't know what to expect in this special Autumn episode next week, but I cannot wait to see what happens. And like I said, is Naomie Harris going to look for her husband? Or is she just someone else entirely? What does it mean that Sam is now the father? Is he going to stay the father? Is he going to have to kill himself for his son to survive, Nathan? Because you can't have two fathers, maybe. I don't know, guys. But again, this episode was just so well told. The intent, the stakes were there. The mystery was there. The weirdness was there. The cult-like following, the religious aspect. This show was just clicking on all cylinders for me, and this episode was fantastic. It's one of my favorite episodes of TV so far this year. I love this episode, guys. So that's the recap. That's the review. That's the breakdown. I want to know what you all thought of this episode in the comments below. Your pros, your cons, your theories. If I overlook something, if I miss something, if I misinterpret something, how did you interpret this episode? How did you interpret certain scenes? Let me know in the comments. As always, make sure to like, share, comment below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit that bell so you don't miss any of my other third day reviews. Luca Guadagnino's We Are Who We Are, Lovecraft Country, Raised by Wolves, The Boys, Ted Lasso. I watch a lot of TV, so definitely hit that bell so you don't miss any of my TV reviews, my movie reviews, my live streams, and all the fun things we do on this channel. Hope you all are having a great day. Hope you enjoyed this review, and we'll see you on the next video.